to the True Skies of Africa, a Black History Month event. We are live from the Library Learning Studio here at our Newtown campus. And we are also welcoming, in addition to those here in person, we are welcoming our Zoom audience as well. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jean Dolan. I'm the Director of DEI and Community Engagement here at Bucks County Community College. I'm also a proud Bucks alumna. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today. Kevin Antoine is the college's Associate Vice President of Community and Government Relations and Chief DEI Officer. The U.S. Air Force veteran is a Fulbright Specialist Scholar and a former Harvard School of Public Health Fellow. He earned his Juris Doctor degree from the College of William and Mary Law School. Kevin?
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everybody out in the three different audiences that we are presenting in today, here live on the campus, our Zoom streaming audience, and Eventbrite online. When I was in the Air Force, when we would fly over land masses, one thing that always struck me a little funny, when you look at the world maps, you see how large continents are. And when you're flying, you were thinking that it may take you longer to fly over some than others. It was always just the opposite. We would zip past Europe, and then, Africa, if you ever drive the Southwest in the United States, you wake up, go to bed, wake up, go to bed, you're still in Texas. That's how Africa is. That's how Africa is from the air. I didn't understand that, but, as time has gone on, I understand now that, the military maps, first of all, are way more accurate. And then second of all, there was some things going on with the way mapping was done 400 years ago that we still use today. And so one of the things that my research that I discovered was that Africa has been incorrectly represented on world maps, on globes throughout the world for the last 400 years. And so part of what we want to do today is to hopefully start a correction of that so that the mother continent can really be shown and represented for the true size that it is. And before I go on, let me just say good afternoon, Kashikan, Buenos tardes, Shalom, Niha, Konnichiwa. Let's get on with the program. The true size of Africa. Presented by Kevin Antoine. Take a look at any map, and it is clear that the African continent is a big place. However, despite the common perception that Africa is a large landmass, the second largest continent, it's still one that is vastly underestimated by most casual map viewers. The reason for this is that the familiar Mercator Map Projection tends to distort our geographical view of the world in a crucial way, one that often leads to misconceptions about the relative sizes of both countries and continents. Gerardus Mercator was a 16th century geographer, cosmographer, and cartographer from the country of Flanders. He is most renowned for creating the 1569 world map, where the spherical globe is flattened into a two-dimensional map, with latitude and longitude lines drawn in a straight grid, an innovation that is still employed in nautical charts today. Mercator's world map flattened the spherical planet to make it easier to display. However, on the flattened globe, land masses are not proportional to their actual size, especially towards the poles. Mercator created his 1569 world map by taking a globe with a paper cylinder wrapped around it, projected that globe onto the paper, and then unwrapped it. He then expanded degrees of latitude as they approached the poles, which distorted land but allowed the directions to be clearer.
Before Mercator's 1569 world map, map makers often etched their maps onto paper that they then painstakingly pasted onto papier-mâché spears. Old maps had problems though. Mapping a three-dimensional globe onto a two-dimensional map always involves some distortions. But early maps had serious issues for navigators. They were mostly elliptical and struggled to capture the curvature of the earth for sailors who were plotting a course. Sailors using them were constantly twisting, curving, and recalculating to compensate for their map's deficiencies. Mercator's map, with latitude and longitude lines drawn in a straight grid, corrected these deficiencies. The international slave trade. While there is no historical evidence that Mercator supported slavery, his straight-line grids of longitude and latitude on his maps made it clearer for European sailors to navigate the so-called triangular slave trade, which operated between Europe, Africa, and the Americas from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas, raw materials to Europe, trade goods to Africa. Because the Mercator map displayed Europe and North America much larger than they were, the Europeans arguably felt dominant, more powerful than the Africans. After all, they were coming from a much larger landmass area to a smaller one. The international slave trade lasted more than 300 years. The bias and self-superiority of the Europeans, believing they came from a landmass much larger than it was, gave them a sense of superiority to dominate land areas they believed were smaller than Europe. Present day. The African continent has a land area of 30.37 million square kilometers, enough to fit in the United States, China, India, Japan, Mexico, and many European nations combined. For those of us living in Western countries, this is an interesting dilemma to consider. This animation correctly shows the actual size of the continents on the planet. This means that the sizes of European and North American countries are distorted, giving Europeans and North Americans an inaccurate mental measuring stick for judging not only the relative sizes of other countries, but for judging relative importance in the world. The world maps that prevail today have been embedded in Western imagination since the British Empire. They continue to prevail despite many challenges to their fairness and accuracy. They underpin the ongoing Anglo-Euro-American presumption that the world belongs to them. One of the dangers of the Mercator map is that it can make enlarged countries seem unnaturally powerful and intimidating. The term power of representation and representation of power sums up quite well how maps and the rise of the Western nation-state system, and with that, empire and colonialism, are linked. The Mercator map still dominates the digital revolution as further strengthening its position. Today, the Mercator Map Projection is used as a template at Google Maps. Most K-12 schools around the world still use the Mercator Map Projection, thus perpetuating the myth that North American and European countries are larger and more important than Africa. The African continent holds a huge proportion of the world's natural resources, both renewables and non-renewables. Africa is home to some 30% of the world's mineral reserves, rare earth metals, 8% of the world's natural gas, and 12% of the world's oil reserves. The continent has 40% of the world's gold and up to 90% of its chromium and platinum. The largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, and uranium in the world are in Africa. It holds 65% of the world's arable land and 10% of the planet's internal renewable fresh water source. Now is the time to correct the world's maps to reflect the true size of the world's continents and the true size of Mother Africa.
Interesting information, isn't it? How can a country that size, a continent that size, that possesses most of the world's natural resources, be treated throughout history as a country no bigger than an island? Several colonial powers have tried to dominate the continent, and for a couple of hundred years, they were there. The British, the French, Portuguese. But I think what happened is that because of the inaccuracy of the maps, they found out what a huge task it would be to subdue that continent. It wasn't just the West Coast, that's what they thought. And that's why all of them eventually have failed to subdue the continent. They have gone and drawn some of the boundaries that some of the countries have today, a bit arbitrarily, but no power has gone there and dominated it and conquered it to the extent that they have a monopoly on all the natural resources. Right now, what we see going on with Russia and China is just the latest in a succession of powers north of the equator going to Africa for its resources. That's it, just for its resources. So I want to show you something real quick. Can I go to the website here? Absolutely. So I'm on the website, thetruesize.com. It has taken in the account from satellite imagery and give us a more accurate picture of what the relative countries and sizes are in the world. So I'm gonna just type in a couple of countries, and then I will be able to drag it in to Africa. There we go. See that?
Holy cow.
Let's try something that we're a little more familiar with. Like, Greenland, it's this big dominant ice land, right? Above Canada, right? It looks to be as big as Africa, right? Look at it. Bigger, right? Exactly.
Wow.
This has been going on for 400 years. Let's do Russia. Russia looks big, right? I mean, and it is a big country. I'm not trying to say that it isn't. Let's do China. And it looks very dominating, right? There's China.
About a third of the size.
Yes. Now while I'm at it, let me do the remaining two permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So I've done the United States, I've done Russia and China. Let's do the United Kingdom and France. There's France. UK. Or let's see, can I do a state? I'm not certain. Let me see. Yes, I can do Alaska. Now we know on our maps, Alaska is big, right? It's bigger than Texas. It's about half the size of the US. Looks to be about maybe a quarter the size of Africa. Let's take Alaska.
Yeah.
So from space, this is what Africa looks like. My speaker with me. So now the question is, now that we know the true sizes of continents on the globe, why haven't that's been changed? We just saw from the presentation that Google Maps, of all places, has Google Earth that actually knows the size of continents, right? Why are they still using the Mercator Map Projections? I don't know. There are some other corrective map projections that are out. There's the Peters correction that some of the K-12 schools are starting to use. It accurately displays the size of continents, but what it does is that it doesn't quite put them in the right place, trying to make up for the size of the continents. And so what I found from my research is that there's no one map projection project that is flawless. All of them have some kind of little kinks, but none of them distorts the continents like the way the Mercator map projection does. And over the years, you could argue that people who came from areas in which they thought were the largest in the world felt that way when they went to other places, right? So let's go to the question part here, Damon, one of the slides in here. Okay. So these are some of the questions for the audience. You can put them in the chat on Zoom, or you can, if you're on Eventbrite, you can message it in. But I put these questions to you because I don't have the answers. Was subsequent European imperialism perhaps spurred on by the map projection that reinforced the notions of self-importance held by those nations? I don't know. What do you think? Spud Webb was 5'8" when he played basketball in the NBA. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was 7'2". Who do you think is going to be the dominant player? Huh? Well, let's put Spud on some step ladders though, and let's hide the step ladders. Right? This makes Spud 10 feet tall because he's standing on about, 5 feet of step ladders. And we got a partition around there so you can't see how, what he's stepping on. All of a sudden, there's a presumption maybe he's the better basketball player because of the height. But when you pull back the curtain and look and see what he's stepping on, then we find out, okay, that's not it at all. Can maps be used for propaganda?
Absolutely.
I'm old enough to remember, bring up I think the Soviet slide. When we were indoctrinated about the Red Scare, and you would see a world map, and then you would see everything in red that represented communism. Remember that? Oh man, I'm scared to death of the Soviet Union and Red China. Look at that, right? So there was a move by some of the countries around the world back in those days. They were called non-aligned. They weren't part of the American sphere of influence or the Soviet Union's or China's. But maps certainly can be used for propaganda. Okay, you can go back to the questions. So now, why continue to use the Mercator projections? I don't understand it. So from a sailor standpoint, I can understand you want the best navigable way in the waters to get to a place. And planes, when I was in the Air Force, do the same thing, longitude and latitude, things are in right angles, you can go straight there. But in the air, there's no illusion about what the size of the earth is. When you make those calculations, I said at the beginning, I always wonder why, we would zip over Europe when I thought it was much bigger, and fly real fast over Europe, and we thought it was a lot larger. And then we got to Africa, we thought we could fly over it, pretty quick, and it was too massive. So if we know those are incorrect, why is it still being taught? Why is even modern IT companies like Google and OpenStreetMap and even Bing still basing their mapping on the Mercator Map projections? And the last one here that I just wanted to mention, and I mentioned it when I was showing the imagery, how when you bring countries to their regular size and put them into Africa. But now let's just talk about the international importance of that. Europe has 3 members of the Security Council. There are 3 of the 5 permanent members. We just saw how small Europe is. Europe depends on Russia for oil and gas, the United States for military protection. Africa has 55 nations that are in the United Nations. 1/3 of the membership of the United Nations are African countries. A few of them have rotated on what they call the non-permanent membership. You're appointed, I think, for 1 or 2 years, and then there's another vote. That vote is always done by the 5 permanent members: the United States, the UK, Russia, China, and France. Scroll down, David, on that slide there. So here are some more facts that sort of puts everything, I think, in perspective, at least for me. Africa's population is the youngest in the world. The median age is 19. So that means where human life began is also where human life will be continued, because we have the youngest population. So there's more reproduction going on. 40% of their population is under age 15. That's really the new world when you think about it. Because look at the numbers for everybody else. North America, the median age is 35 years. Europe is 42. Asia and South America, the median age is 31. But yet Europe has the highest percentage of seniors, 19%. And as I mentioned earlier, of the 193 members of the United Nations, 55 come from Africa. Now let's just flip it. Suppose all this was the United States. How much propaganda would be going on? Huh? If we had all that, right? Or if it was China or Russia or any other country, any other 5 permanent members of the United Nations, if this is what they had. Bring up the slide with the natural resources. Could it be this is the reason Africa has always been portrayed as small and unimportant? It is much easier to go get the natural resources when nobody's looking, right? And we've seen for centuries how different colonial powers have attempted that. Starting with the Portuguese in the 1500s, then followed by the British, then followed by the French. But yet, after all that exploitation and after all that, pillaging, so they thought of the natural resources of Africa, it still holds the world's vast supply of natural resources, even after all that. Even after all that, they continue every day to find new deposits of things on the continent. Crude oil, diamonds, gold. The one statistic that really stood out to me was 40% of the gold on the planet is in Africa. So maybe that's why superpowers like to keep it stable, right? Just think if Africa was, one country, like how the US, it goes from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. What if there was a country in Africa that, that could do that, that could sort of dominate, that continent like that? Maybe we wouldn't see all these different other countries going in there at some point trying to exploit the people and the resources. So the current world power in there now is China. They're, building roads, they're building facilities, they're building schoolhouses, those sorts of things. But now what we're finding out is that most of the workers are from China. So once again, there are no revenues going into Africa for any of that. And so I'm figuring out why are they in there paving roads and making roads? What is it that they want? Is it because of goodwill? Or is it because of the oil, the gold, the coffee, the diamond, the plutonium, the uranium? Maybe it has something to do with that. So what I would encourage everybody, to do is to, do your own research on the subject. I presented you my research. Do your own research on it, see what you come up with, and then see what is can be done to sort of correct the historical inaccuracies. First of all, of the size of all the continents, and then sort of put that in perspective as to what can be done to help, Mother Africa to be democratic in all of its institutions. It doesn't become attractive anymore for foreign countries to go in there and exploit it. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out for the presentation. I hope that we've given you a little bit of knowledge about, what's going on, and one of the ways that we can sort of curb the reliance on the falseness of the size of the world's continents, but also try to historically understand, why it happened and who have been the people that have suffered, the most from it. I won't say learned, but we've showed that, most of the world's resources are in Africa. The majority of the members of the United Nations come from Africa. And so I think that, and we also saw that the continuation really of the human race is in Africa, right? where the human race started. So there's some karma, kind of in that, really, if you just think of all the things that's been done to decimate Africa. But again, I just want to thank you all, for coming out. And I know we have some other programs.